I never thought I'd be the type of woman to sit in silence while someone else takes credit for my generosity. But there I was, at my nephew David's wedding, watching his bride's family bask in praise for the beautiful venue they provided, when I was the one who quietly wrote that $75,000 check. The irony wasn't lost on me. I've spent 63 years being the invisible pillar holding everyone up, and somehow I'm still surprised when no one sees me. The morning of the wedding, I'd stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. It was from Nordstrom, a splurge I'd justified because this was David's big day. The dress had delicate beading around the neckline, and I'd paired it with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd always planned to give to David's bride someday. As I applied my lipstick, Revlon's Cherries in the Snow, the same shade I'd worn for 30 years, I wondered if anyone would notice the effort I'd put into looking my best for his special day. David has been like a son to me since his parents died in that car accident 15 years ago. I can still remember that awful phone call at 2:47 a.m., the way the rain was pelting my bedroom window as the police officer's voice delivered news that would change everything. Margaret, my baby sister, and her husband Tom were gone, leaving behind a devastated 17-year-old boy who suddenly had no one but me. I raised him through his rebellious teenage years, sitting up until midnight waiting for him to come home from parties, helping him navigate college applications when his grades weren't quite good enough for his first-choice schools. I remember the night he came home drunk at 19, crying about how he missed his parents, how he felt like he was drowning. I held him on my living room couch until dawn, stroking his hair the way Margaret used to do when he was small. I put him through college, not just financially, but emotionally. Every semester when his confidence wavered, every time he called me sobbing about a failed exam or a broken heart, I was there. I attended every graduation, every award ceremony, every milestone moment that his parents should have witnessed. When he got his first job at the marketing firm in Atlanta, I was the one he called first, before his girlfriend, before his friends. When he told me about Sarah and how much he loved her, I was thrilled. She was everything I'd hoped for him. Kind, intelligent, ambitious. She made him laugh in a way I hadn't seen since before his parents died. When he brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, she complimented my pot roast and asked genuine questions about my work at the library. I thought I'd finally gained not just a niece-in-law, but a daughter. When he mentioned they couldn't afford their dream venue, the historic Magnolia Estate with its sprawling gardens and antebellum charm, I didn't hesitate. I'd driven past that estate countless times over the years, admiring its white columns and ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. I knew it was where fairy tale weddings happened, where memories were made that would last generations. I called the venue that same afternoon, speaking with their wedding coordinator, a lovely woman named Rebecca, who walked me through every detail. The ceremony would be held in the Rose Garden, with the reception under a tent on the back lawn. The catering would feature Southern classics with an elegant twist. The photography package included drone shots of the estate's magnificent facade. It was everything David and Sarah had dreamed of, and more. "Don't worry about it," I told David when I handed him the confirmation papers. "Consider it my wedding gift." I remember the way his eyes filled with tears, how he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Aunt B, I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You've already given me so much." What I didn't expect was for Sarah's mother, Patricia, to somehow convince everyone that her family had secured this prestigious location. Maybe it was easier for people to believe that the wealthy real estate developer's family could afford such luxury, rather than the retired librarian who lived modestly in her small craftsman house on the less fashionable side of town. But as I sat there in my navy dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this day, listening to toast after toast, praising the incredible generosity of the bride's family, something inside me began to crack. The worst part wasn't the money, though $75,000 represented nearly half of my life savings. It was watching David smile and nod along, never once correcting the narrative, never once acknowledging that his aunt had made his dream wedding possible. The Georgia summer heat was stifling under the white tent, and the scent of magnolias felt almost mocking as I realized that my nephew, the boy I'd tucked into bed countless nights, the young man I'd cheered for at every graduation, had let me become invisible at his own wedding. The moment that shattered my heart completely came during the father of the bride speech. Patricia's husband, Robert, stood up with his crystal champagne flute, catching the golden hour light filtering through the ancient oak trees. His voice boomed across the reception as he gestured grandly toward the estate's columned mansion, his gold Rolex glinting as he raised his arm. "Sarah has always deserved the very best," he declared, his southern drawl thick with pride and bourbon. "And when she fell in love with this venue, Patricia and I knew we had to make her dreams come true. This place, with its history dating back to 1847, represents the kind of legacy we want to build for our children." I watched from my assigned table, table 7, not the family table where I should have been sitting, as Robert continued his speech. He talked about the estate's Civil War history, how Confederate generals had once walked these very grounds. He mentioned the famous weddings that had taken place here, the celebrities who had chosen this venue for their special days. Every word was a knife twist, because I had researched all of this history myself when I was deciding whether this venue was worthy of David's wedding. The applause was thunderous. Women dabbed at their eyes with cocktail napkins, and men nodded approvingly at Robert's obvious wealth and generosity. I felt my cheeks burn as guests turned to smile appreciatively at Patricia, who dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her initials embroidered in gold thread that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, Atlanta's premier society columnist, was furiously taking notes at the press table. I could already imagine tomorrow's write-up in the lifestyle section. Real estate mogul, Robert Caldwell, spares no expense for daughter's dream wedding. The story would be picked up by other publications, shared on social media, cementing the lie in print forever. The irony was suffocating. Here was a man taking credit for a venue I'd researched for weeks, calling 3 different wedding planners to get recommendations, reading dozens of reviews online. I'd chosen this place because I knew Sarah would love the way the Spanish moss draped over the ceremony arch like nature's own wedding veil, how the rose garden would provide the perfect backdrop for her photos, how the historic mansion would make her feel like a southern belle from a romance novel. I had spent hours on the phone with Rebecca, the venue coordinator, discussing every detail. The menu selection, I'd insisted on including David's favorite shrimp and grits alongside the more traditional options. The floral arrangements, I'd specifically requested white roses and magnolia blossoms because I remembered Sarah mentioning how much she loved that combination. The lighting, I'd paid extra for the string lights in the oak trees because I knew they would create the magical atmosphere she'd always dreamed of. I caught David's eye across the reception. For just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker there, guilt maybe, or recognition. His face went pale, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But then Sarah squeezed his hand, whispering something in his ear that made her diamond bracelet, a wedding gift from her parents, catch the light. He turned away, lost again in his new wife's radiant smile, and the moment of potential acknowledgement was gone. The string quartet began playing At Last, and couples moved onto the dance floor that I had paid for, under lights I had funded, celebrating a love I had made possible. I watched David lead Sarah in their first dance, remembering how I'd taught him to waltz in my living room when he was 16, preparing him for his high school prom. His mother had always said he had 2 left feet, but I'd been patient, counting out the steps until he could glide across my hardwood floors with confidence. My sister Margaret, David's mother, would have been furious. She always said family should stick together, should honor those who sacrifice for them. "Blood is thicker than water, Beatrice," she used to tell me, "and family loyalty is everything." But Margaret was gone, buried in Oakwood Cemetery under a headstone I'd helped pay for. And apparently, so was the boy who used to call me Aunt B and promise he'd always take care of me when I got old. As the evening wore on, more toasts were made, each one crediting the Caldwell family's generosity. Sarah's maid of honor mentioned how blessed Sarah was to have parents who could provide such an incredible celebration. The best man joked about how Robert had set the bar impossibly high for future weddings. Even the wedding planner, in her brief remarks, thanked the generous hosts for choosing such a spectacular venue. What would you do in my place? Would you speak up, or would you continue to smile and pretend your heart wasn't breaking with every word of praise directed at someone else? The days following the wedding felt like walking through fog. I returned to my quiet house on Peachtree Lane, where the wedding invitation still sat on my kitchen counter next to the bank statement showing the $75,000 withdrawal. The contrast was stark. My modest home with its second-hand furniture and carefully tended garden versus the opulent celebration I'd funded but couldn't claim. My house, built in 1925, had been home for 38 years. I'd bought it with my late husband Harold after we'd saved every penny from our teaching salaries. The hardwood floors creaked in familiar places. The kitchen faucet dripped no matter how many times I'd had it fixed, and the front porch swing where Harold and I used to sit every evening still bore the wear marks from decades of use. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, filled with memories and love. I found myself replaying every moment, every conversation from the wedding. Had I been unclear when I told David this was my gift? Had I somehow given him permission to let others take credit? I pulled out the folder where I kept all the wedding-related documents, the venue contract with my signature, the catering agreement with my credit card information, the florist receipts showing my name and address. Everything was there in black and white, proof of my generosity that apparently meant nothing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. This was the culmination of years of being taken for granted, of being the family's silent benefactor, while others received the credit and gratitude. There was the time I'd quietly paid for David's car repairs when he was in college, $3,200 for a new transmission that would have left him stranded without transportation to his part-time job. I'd called the mechanic directly, given them my credit card number, and told David the work was covered. Later, I overheard him telling his friends that his scholarship money had covered the unexpected expense, never mentioning his aunt who'd actually saved the day. The Christmas I'd bought him the expensive MacBook Pro he needed for his senior project, $2,800 that I'd saved by skipping my annual vacation and eating more meals at home. I'd wrapped it carefully, placed it under my tree, and watched his face light up Christmas morning. But when his girlfriend asked where such an expensive gift had come from, he'd laughed and said, "Santa was extra generous this year," winking at me as if we shared some cute inside joke rather than acknowledging a significant financial sacrifice. The countless times I'd been his safety net, his silent benefactor, his invisible support system. When he needed a co-signer for his apartment lease, when he couldn't make his car payment during a slow month at work, when he wanted to take Sarah on a romantic weekend getaway but was short on funds, I was always there, always ready to help, always asking for nothing in return except maybe a thank you and the knowledge that I was making his life easier. My phone rang twice that week. Both times it was David, calling to thank me for being there and for my beautiful toast. During the first call, he gushed about how perfect everything had been, how Sarah couldn't stop talking about what a magical day it was. The venue was absolutely incredible, Aunt B. Sarah's parents really outdid themselves. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I just murmured agreement and asked about their honeymoon plans. The second call came 3 days later. David wanted to tell me about the thank you cards they were writing, how they were so grateful to everyone who had made their day special. "We're writing a special note to the Caldwells, thanking them for the venue," he said, his voice bright with happiness. Robert told me it was the most expensive wedding he'd ever hosted, but he said Sarah was worth every penny. Not once did he mention my contribution. Not once did he acknowledge what I'd actually done. When I gently brought up the reception, mentioning how beautiful the rose garden had looked, he quickly changed the subject to their honeymoon in Tuscany, another expense I suspected his new in-laws were covering. I started taking long walks through my neighborhood, past the other craftsman houses with their front porches and rocking chairs. My neighbors, mostly retirees like myself, would wave and ask about the wedding. Mrs. Henderson from next door had seen the photos on Facebook and couldn't stop talking about how elegant everything looked. "Sarah's family really went all out," she said, showing me the pictures on her phone. "That venue must have cost a fortune. Her father must really love her." Mr. Peterson, who lived across the street, mentioned seeing the wedding featured in the society pages. "That Robert Caldwell sure knows how to throw a party," he chuckled. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to spend on your daughter's wedding." Each comment was another small cut, another reminder that my generosity had been erased from the story. But something else was growing alongside the hurt, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent my entire life being accommodating, being understanding, being the person who sacrificed without complaint. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. 3 weeks after the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to reclaim my story, but not in the way anyone would expect. I'd spent my career as a librarian understanding the power of documentation, of keeping records, of preserving truth. It was time to put those skills to use. The Decatur Public Library, where I'd worked for 37 years, had taught me the importance of accurate record-keeping. As head librarian, I'd overseen the digitization of historical documents, helped researchers trace family genealogies, and maintained archives that preserved truth for future generations. I understood better than most that stories could be rewritten, that history belonged to those who documented it properly. I started with the wedding photos. Sarah had tagged the venue in every post, gushing about how blessed she felt that her parents could give her such a fairy tale setting. Her Instagram account, which had gained 3,000 new followers since the wedding, was filled with professional shots of the ceremony and reception. The comments were filled with praise for the bride's family's generosity. "Your parents are amazing. What a dream wedding. Goals for when I get married." I screenshot every single post, every comment, every story mention. I created a digital folder on my computer titled Wedding Documentation and methodically saved each piece of evidence. The narrative that had replaced reality was now preserved in digital amber, ready to be referenced when the time came. Next, I gathered my financial documentation. The bank statements showing the $75,000 withdrawal dated 3 months before the wedding. The venue contract, signed in my name with my address and phone number. The email correspondence with Rebecca, the wedding coordinator, stretching back 6 months and clearly showing me as the client making all the decisions and payments. I had the catering contract. I'd upgraded the menu to include a raw bar and premium bar service, adding an extra $8,000 to the bill because I wanted David's wedding to be perfect. The florist receipts showed my specific requests for white roses and magnolia blossoms, along with the upgraded centerpieces I'd insisted on. The photography package confirmation showed my credit card payment for the premium package that included the drone footage and extended reception coverage. But this wasn't about public humiliation or family drama. This was about something deeper, about the value of truth, about the importance of acknowledging sacrifice, about refusing to let love be taken for granted. I had a plan, and it would unfold slowly, deliberately, with the same quiet strength that had carried me through 63 years of life. I called my financial advisor, Martha Stevenson, who'd helped me manage my late husband's life insurance money, the money that had made David's wedding possible. Martha had been Harold's colleague at the high school where they both taught mathematics. After Harold's heart attack 8 years ago, she'd helped me navigate the insurance claims and investment decisions that had grown my modest savings into something more substantial. "I want to make some changes to my will," I told her during our meeting at her downtown office. "And I want to establish a scholarship fund." Martha raised an eyebrow. She knew I wasn't impulsive with money. I'd been the same careful, methodical client for 8 years, never making dramatic financial decisions without extensive research and consideration. "What kind of scholarship are you thinking about, Beatrice?" she asked, pulling out a legal pad to take notes. Her office overlooked Centennial Olympic Park, and I could see families walking with their children, couples holding hands, people living their lives with the assumption that love and generosity would be recognized and appreciated. "Something for students who understand the value of family sacrifice," I said carefully. "Students who demonstrate not just academic achievement, but genuine gratitude for the people who've supported their dreams." The afternoon sun streamed through my living room windows as I sat at my writing desk, the same antique secretary desk where I'd helped David with his homework all those years ago. I'd bought it at an estate sale in 1987, refinished it myself, and used it for everything from paying bills to writing Christmas cards. The wood was worn smooth from decades of use, and the small drawers held everything from stamps to spare reading glasses. I pulled out my finest stationery, cream-colored paper with my monogram embossed in navy blue, a gift Harold had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary. I began to write, not a letter of confrontation, but something far more powerful, a letter of truth that would be opened only after my death, explaining to David exactly how his wedding had been funded and why I'd chosen to remain silent about it. My plan was taking shape, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt a sense of purpose returning. Sometimes the most profound statements are made not with loud words, but with quiet actions that speak volumes. "What would you do in my place? Would you confront the situation head-on, or would you find a more subtle way to ensure the truth eventually comes to light? The scholarship fund was my masterstroke, though no one would understand its significance until much later. I named it the Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship for students who honor family sacrifice, after David's mother, my beloved sister. The fund would provide $75,000 annually to students who demonstrated not just academic excellence, but genuine appreciation for the family members who supported their dreams. Margaret would have loved the irony. She'd always been the more direct of the two of us, the one who spoke her mind without worrying about hurt feelings. "Beatrice," she used to tell me, "you're too nice for your own good. Sometimes people need to hear the truth, even when it stings." If she were alive, she would have marched right up to David at his wedding reception and set the record straight in front of everyone. I worked with Martha to structure the scholarship perfectly. The selection committee would include representatives from local high schools, community colleges, and the University of Georgia. Applicants would need to submit not just transcripts and test scores, but essays describing a family member who had made significant sacrifices for their education or opportunities. They would need letters of recommendation that specifically addressed their character and gratitude, not just their academic achievements. The scholarship would be announced at the annual Magnolia Estate Charity Gala, the same venue where David's wedding had taken place. The irony was intentional, though I doubted anyone would make the connection immediately. The gala, held every October to benefit local educational initiatives, would be the perfect venue to launch a scholarship focused on recognizing family sacrifice. I spent hours crafting the scholarship criteria with Martha and the attorney she'd recommended, James Morrison. The application would require students to write a 1,000-word essay titled "The Unsung Hero in My Life," describing someone who had made significant sacrifices to support their dreams. They would need to provide specific examples of how this person had helped them, what sacrifices were made, and how they planned to honor that generosity in the future. The selection process would be rigorous. Finalists would be interviewed by the committee, and part of that interview would focus on their understanding of gratitude and family loyalty. The scholarship wouldn't just pay for college. It would come with mentorship opportunities and a requirement that recipients write annual letters to their unsung hero, sharing their progress and expressing their ongoing appreciation. As I finalized the paperwork, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. This wasn't about revenge or public embarrassment. This was about creating something meaningful from my disappointment, about ensuring that other young people would learn to recognize and honor the sacrifices made for them. If David couldn't acknowledge what I'd done for him, perhaps I could help other families avoid the same heartbreak. I also made subtle changes to my will. David would still inherit my house and most of my savings, but with conditions. The inheritance would come with a sealed letter explaining exactly how his wedding had been funded, along with copies of all the documentation I'd carefully preserved. The letter would be written with love, not anger, but it would leave no doubt about the truth. The house on Peachtree Lane, worth about $180,000 in the current market, would be his, along with my remaining savings of approximately $95,000. But the inheritance would come with a request, not a demand, but a heartfelt ask that he use part of it to continue the scholarship in his mother's name. The letter would explain that this was his opportunity to honor both his mother's memory and his aunt's love, to turn a moment of disappointment into something beautiful and lasting. The beauty of my plan was its gentleness. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no family explosions, no social media wars, just truth, revealed in its own time, with love and dignity intact. David would learn what I'd done for him, but only after I was gone, when his anger couldn't hurt me, and his guilt might actually motivate him to do better. I spent my evenings that week tending to my garden, the same garden where David used to help me plant tomatoes when he was 12. The late summer blooms were particularly vibrant this year. The hydrangeas a deep blue that reminded me of my wedding dress, the roses still fragrant despite the oppressive Georgia heat. My garden had always been my sanctuary, the place where I could think clearly and find peace. As I watered the flowers Harold had planted for our anniversary years ago, I thought about growth, about patience, about how the most beautiful things often bloom quietly, without fanfare. My marriage had been like that. 34 years of quiet love, daily kindnesses, small sacrifices that added up to a lifetime of devotion. Harold had understood the value of unsung heroism, of love expressed through actions rather than words. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Aunt B, Sarah and I want to have you over for dinner soon. We have some exciting news to share." I smiled as I read it, wondering if they were expecting their first child. If so, I hoped that child would grow up understanding the difference between generosity acknowledged and generosity taken for granted. Perhaps this baby would be the fresh start our family needed, a chance to build relationships based on honesty and appreciation. The foundation was set. The truth was documented. The scholarship was funded. Now all that remained was to let time reveal what needed to be revealed, trusting that love and truth have a way of finding each other, even when they've been temporarily separated. The Magnolia Estate Charity Gala was everything I had imagined it would be. The same venue that had hosted David's wedding now sparkled under October's crisp evening sky, transformed into an elegant fundraising event for educational initiatives. I arrived wearing my best black dress, a simple but elegant piece I'd bought for Harold's funeral and had worn to every important occasion since. Tonight, it felt like armor. The irony of the setting wasn't lost on me as I walked through the rose garden where David and Sarah had exchanged vows just 3 months earlier. The same Spanish moss draped the oak trees. The same historic mansion provided the backdrop. But tonight, I wasn't an invisible guest at someone else's celebration. Tonight, I was the guest of honor. Rebecca, the venue coordinator who had worked with me on David's wedding, greeted me warmly at the entrance. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so excited about tonight's announcement," she said, her eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. "The Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship is going to change so many lives. Your sister would be so proud." I had specifically requested that Rebecca handle tonight's event, knowing she would understand the deeper significance of what was happening. During our planning meetings, I had shared the story of Margaret's death, how she had always emphasized the importance of family loyalty and gratitude. Rebecca had listened with tears in her eyes, understanding immediately why this scholarship mattered so much to me. The gala's guest list included many of Atlanta's most prominent families, the same social circle that had attended David's wedding. I spotted Patricia and Robert Caldwell across the room, Patricia resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. They were holding court near the bar, regaling other guests with stories of Sarah and David's honeymoon in Tuscany. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations with people who had been at the wedding, people who still believed the Caldwells had provided that magical venue. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the society columnist, approached me with her usual predatory smile. "Beatrice, darling, I had no idea you were involved in educational philanthropy. This scholarship sounds absolutely wonderful." "Education has always been important to me," I replied carefully. "My sister Margaret was a teacher, and she believed that recognizing sacrifice was crucial to building character in young people." Mrs. Whitman nodded absently, already scanning the room for more prominent guests to interview. The moment of revelation came during the formal presentation. James Morrison, the attorney who had helped structure the scholarship, took the microphone as the crowd gathered in the main ballroom. The same room where David and Sarah had shared their first dance was now filled with Atlanta's elite, all focused on the stage where my truth was about to be revealed. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "tonight we're here to announce a remarkable gift to our community. The Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship, established by Mrs. Beatrice Thompson, will provide $75,000 annually to students who demonstrate not just academic excellence, but genuine appreciation for family sacrifice." I watched from my table as heads turned toward me, expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise. $75,000 was serious money, even in this crowd of wealthy philanthropists. Murmurs rippled through the audience as people began to calculate what such a generous annual commitment meant about my financial resources. "Mrs. Thompson," James continued, "has chosen to fund this scholarship in memory of her sister Margaret, who understood that the greatest gifts in life often come from the quiet sacrifices of those who love us most. The scholarship will be awarded to students who can demonstrate not just need and merit, but genuine gratitude for the family members who have supported their dreams." The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was watching the Caldwells' table, where Patricia's face had gone pale and Robert was leaning forward with a confused frown. They were doing the math, realizing that the quiet librarian they'd barely acknowledged at the wedding had just announced a scholarship fund that dwarfed most of their own charitable contributions. But it was David's reaction that mattered most. He and Sarah were seated at a table near the front, and I could see the exact moment when understanding dawned on his face. His eyes widened, his mouth fell open slightly, and he turned to stare at me across the crowded room. Sarah was whispering urgently in his ear, her own face flushed with what looked like embarrassment. The presentation continued with details about the application process, the selection criteria, and the first scholarship recipient, a young woman named Maria Santos, whose grandmother had worked 3 jobs to help pay for her college preparation courses. As Maria took the stage to accept her award, tears streaming down her face as she thanked her grandmother in both English and Spanish, I felt a deep satisfaction settle in my chest. This was what gratitude looked like. This was what it meant to acknowledge sacrifice, to honor the people who give everything for the ones they love. Maria's grandmother, a tiny woman in her 70s who cleaned office buildings at night and houses during the day, beamed with pride as her granddaughter spoke about her sacrifices. "My abuela sold her wedding ring to pay for my SAT prep course," Maria said, her voice breaking with emotion. "She never told me until I got my acceptance letter to Georgia Tech. She said education was worth more than gold, and that my success would be her greatest treasure." The audience was moved to tears, and I found myself thinking about all the sacrifices that go unrecognized, all the quiet heroes who give everything and ask for nothing in return. This scholarship would ensure that at least some of those heroes would be acknowledged, that their sacrifices would be honored and remembered. As the evening wound down, I noticed David making his way toward my table. His face was pale, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like shame. Sarah followed behind him, her designer dress rustling as she navigated between the tables. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and I felt surprisingly calm. The truth was finally out, not in anger or confrontation, but in the form of something beautiful and meaningful. The scholarship would outlive all of us, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of recognizing sacrifice. What would you do in my place? Would you feel satisfied by this quiet revelation? Or would you need a more direct confrontation to find peace? David's approach to my table felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon. Inevitable, potentially destructive, but somehow necessary. His face was ashen, and I could see his hands trembling slightly as he navigated between the elegantly dressed guests who were still discussing the evening's surprising revelation. "Aunt B," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he reached my table. Could we talk privately?" Sarah stood beside him, her usual composure cracked. The confident young woman who had glided through her wedding reception, accepting praise for her family's generosity, now looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she nervously twisted it around her wrist. I nodded toward the venue's library, a quiet room lined with leather-bound books that I had specifically requested for tonight's event. It seemed fitting that our conversation would take place surrounded by stories, by the written record of human experience and truth. The library was dimly lit, with soft lamplight casting shadows across the mahogany shelves. Through the tall windows, I could see the same garden where they had been married, now bathed in moonlight instead of the golden hour glow of their wedding day. "Aunt B, David started, then stopped, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was caught in some mischief. "The scholarship, $75,000, that's the same amount as your wedding venue," I finished quietly. "Yes, David, it is." Sarah sank into one of the leather armchairs, her face buried in her hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, what have we done?" The silence stretched between us, filled with 3 months of unspoken truths and accumulated hurt. I could hear the distant sounds of the gala winding down, guests saying their goodbyes, cars starting in the parking lot. But in this room, time seemed suspended. "Why didn't you say anything?" David asked, his voice breaking. "At the wedding, when everyone was thanking my in-laws, why didn't you correct them?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself countless times over the past months. "Because I thought you would," I said simply. "I thought that when your new father-in-law stood up and took credit for giving you the wedding of your dreams, you would speak up. I thought you would say, actually, my Aunt Beatrice made this possible. David's face crumpled, and suddenly he looked like the 17-year-old boy who had cried in my arms the night his parents died. I was going to, he said. I wanted to. But Sarah's family, they were so proud, and everyone was looking at them with such admiration. I thought it would embarrass them if I corrected the story, so you chose to embarrass me instead, I said, not with anger, but with a sadness that seemed to echo through the room. You chose to let me sit there, invisible, while everyone praised someone else for my generosity. Sarah looked up from her hands, her makeup smeared with tears. Mrs. Thompson, I had no idea. My parents, they never told me they hadn't paid for the venue. When people started congratulating them, I just assumed, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia and Robert had known. They had known that they hadn't paid for the venue, had known that someone else had made their daughter's dream wedding possible, and they had chosen to accept the credit anyway. The betrayal felt even deeper now, knowing that it hadn't been a misunderstanding, but a deliberate deception. Your parents knew, I said to Sarah, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. They knew they hadn't booked the venue. They knew someone else had paid for it. Sarah's face went white. That's impossible. They couldn't. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. She was remembering conversations, perhaps inconsistencies in her parents' story that she had overlooked in the excitement of wedding planning. David was pacing now, his formal tuxedo wrinkled from the stress of the evening. Aunt B, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right. You've done so much for me, given me so much, and I've been taking it all for granted. It's not just the wedding, David, I said, my voice gaining strength. It's years of this, years of me being your safety net, your silent benefactor, while you let others take credit or simply forgot to acknowledge what I'd done. The car repairs in college, the laptop for your senior project, the co-signing, the emergency loans. I was always there, and you were always ready to let me fade into the background. The truth was pouring out now, months of suppressed hurt and disappointment flowing like water through a broken dam. David stopped pacing and stared at me, his face a mixture of shame and dawning realization. I remember the laptop, he said quietly. I told Jessica it was from Santa. I thought it was funny, like an inside joke between us. It wasn't funny to me, I replied. It was a sacrifice. I skipped my vacation that year to buy you that computer. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 2 months to save the money, and you turned it into a joke. Sarah was crying openly now, her designer dress stained with tears. Mrs. Thompson, please tell us how to fix this. Please tell us what we can do. I looked at these 2 young people, both of them successful and intelligent, both of them genuinely remorseful now that the truth was finally out. David was my sister's son, the boy I had raised and loved as my own. Despite everything, despite the hurt and disappointment, I still loved him. The scholarship is my way of fixing it, I said. Not for us, but for other families, other young people who need to learn the value of gratitude, the importance of acknowledging sacrifice. Your wedding venue is gone, David. That money is spent, but now it's going to help students who understand what it means to honor the people who love them. The weight of my words settled over the room like dust on old books. Outside, I could hear the last of the gala guests departing, their laughter and conversation fading into the Georgia night. Soon, we would be alone with the truth and the question of what came next. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in my 63 years. David, his composure completely shattered, began to pace the library like a caged animal, his formal tuxedo disheveled and his hair standing at odd angles from running his hands through it. I have to tell people, he said, his voice rising with panic. I have to correct the record. Tomorrow I'll call everyone who was at the wedding. I'll post on social media. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. David, stop, I said firmly, using the same tone I had used when he was a teenager, threatening to make impulsive decisions. That's not what this is about. But he wasn't listening. The guilt and shame were overwhelming him, and he was grasping for any way to make immediate amends. I'll call the newspaper, that society columnist. I'll tell her to print a correction. I'll make sure everyone knows that you paid for the wedding, that you made it all possible. Sarah, still crying in the leather armchair, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. David, think about what you're saying. If you do that now, 3 months later, it's going to look like we were deliberately deceiving people. It's going to be a scandal." The word scandal seemed to hit David like a slap. He stopped pacing and stared at his wife, and I could see the conflict playing out on his face. Part of him wanted to do the right thing, to finally acknowledge my sacrifice publicly, but another part of him was calculating the social and professional cost of admitting that he had let his in-laws take credit for his aunt's generosity. "So what are you saying?" he asked Sarah, his voice sharp with stress. "That we should just keep lying?" "I'm saying we need to think this through," Sarah replied, her voice steadying as she tried to regain her composure. "Mrs. Thompson, what do you want us to do? What would make this right?" It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself since the night of the wedding. What did I want? Public acknowledgement? An apology? Financial reimbursement? As I sat in that library, surrounded by the weight of accumulated stories and truths, I realized that what I wanted most was something that couldn't be given retroactively. "I wanted you to speak up at the wedding," I said simply. "I wanted you, David, to stand up when your father-in-law was taking credit for my gift and say, 'Actually, my Aunt Beatrice made this possible.' I wanted you to acknowledge, in front of all those people, that I had sacrificed for you, that I had loved you enough to give you the wedding of your dreams." David's face crumpled, and he sank into the chair across from me. "I can't go back and change that moment," he whispered. "I can't undo what I did, or didn't do." "No," I agreed. "You can't." The silence that followed was heavy with regret and lost opportunities. Through the library windows, I could see the venue staff beginning to clean up from the gala, removing centerpieces and folding chairs. The same staff who had cleaned up after David's wedding, never knowing that the quiet woman in the navy dress had paid for everything they were dismantling. Sarah broke the silence, her voice small and uncertain. "My parents? They really knew? They knew they hadn't paid for the venue?" I nodded, watching as the full implications of her parents' deception settled over her. "They knew, Sarah. They accepted the praise, the congratulations, the credit for giving you your dream wedding, knowing that someone else had actually paid for it." Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, anger, shame, and finally a kind of horrified understanding. "They let everyone think. They let me think. Oh God, I thanked them. I wrote them a thank you card for the venue. I posted on Instagram about how generous they were. And they never corrected you," I said gently. "They never said, 'Actually, David's aunt paid for the venue. We should thank her.'" The betrayal was sinking in for Sarah now, just as it had for me months earlier. But her betrayal was different. She had been deceived by her own parents, used as an unwitting participant in their deception. David looked up from his hands, his eyes red with unshed tears. "Aunt B, I know I can't change what happened, but please, tell me what I can do now. Tell me how to make this right." I had been waiting for this question, preparing for this moment since the night I had decided to establish the scholarship. "The scholarship is already established," I said. "That money is gone, committed to helping students who understand the value of gratitude. But there's something else you can do." Both David and Sarah leaned forward, desperate for a way to atone for their failures. "Learn from this," I said. "Learn what it means to acknowledge sacrifice, to recognize the people who love you enough to give without expecting credit. And when you have children, and I hope you will, teach them the difference between generosity acknowledged and generosity taken for granted." David was crying now, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his failures settled over him. "I love you, Aunt B," he said, his voice breaking. "I've always loved you. You've been more than an aunt to me. You've been like a mother, and I've treated you terribly. You've treated me like I was invisible," I corrected gently. "Like my sacrifices didn't matter because they came so easily, so quietly. But love isn't invisible, David. Sacrifice isn't invisible, and neither am I." The confrontation was reaching its climax, the moment when all the hurt and disappointment and love would either tear us apart or begin to heal us. Outside, the last of the venue lights were being turned off, leaving us in the soft glow of the library lamps. Sarah stood up suddenly, her designer dress rustling in the quiet room. "I need to talk to my parents," she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "They need to know that I know the truth. They need to understand what they've done." David looked at his wife with something like admiration. "Sarah, that's going to be difficult." "Yes," she agreed. "It is. But Mrs. Thompson is right. The truth matters, and my parents need to face the truth of what they did. I felt a surge of respect for this young woman who was willing to confront her parents' deception, even knowing it would be painful and potentially damaging to their relationship. Perhaps there was hope for this family after all. What would you do in my place? Would you accept their apologies and promises to do better, or would you need something more concrete to truly forgive and move forward? 6 months have passed since that night in the Magnolia Estate Library, and I'm sitting in my garden on this warm spring morning, watching the roses Harold planted bloom for another season. The scholarship has awarded its second recipient, a young man whose single mother worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his college prep courses. His acceptance speech brought tears to my eyes, just as Maria's had. The changes in my family have been gradual but profound. David calls me every Sunday now, not with casual updates or requests for help, but with real conversations about his life, his work, his marriage. He asks about my health, my garden, my plans for the week. He listens when I talk about Harold, about Margaret, about the loneliness that sometimes creeps in during the quiet evening hours. More importantly, he remembers. When I mentioned that my car was making strange noises, he didn't wait for me to handle it myself. He took it to his mechanic and insisted on paying for the repairs. When my birthday came around, he didn't just send a card. He and Sarah took me to dinner at my favorite restaurant and gave me a photo album filled with pictures of our family over the years, including photos of him as a child that I thought had been lost. Sarah has become the daughter I never had. After confronting her parents about their deception, a conversation that apparently involved tears, shouting, and a temporary estrangement, she began visiting me regularly. She helps me with my computer when I'm struggling with technology, brings me books she thinks I'll enjoy, and has started learning to cook some of Margaret's recipes that I've shared with her. The situation with Patricia and Robert Caldwell remains complicated. They eventually sent me a formal apology letter, acknowledging their role in the wedding deception and offering to make a donation to the scholarship fund. I declined the donation, but accepted their apology, understanding that pride and social pressure had led them to make choices they probably regretted. The scholarship has taken on a life of its own. Local newspapers have written articles about it, and I've received letters from families across Georgia sharing their own stories of unsung heroes and quiet sacrifices. A high school in Savannah has started a Margaret Thompson Day, where students write letters to family members who have supported their dreams. The ripple effects of that one night at the Magnolia Estate continue to spread. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in my own sense of worth. For too many years, I had accepted invisibility as the price of love, had convinced myself that recognition didn't matter as long as I was helping the people I cared about. The scholarship taught me that my sacrifices had value, that my love deserved acknowledgement, that I had the right to be seen and appreciated. I've also made peace with the wedding itself. The $75,000 I spent on David's venue wasn't wasted. It gave him and Sarah a beautiful start to their marriage, and it eventually led to something even more valuable, a scholarship that will help deserving students for generations to come. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are also the most important ones. Last week, Sarah told me she's pregnant. They're expecting their first child in November, and they've asked me to be the baby's godmother. As Sarah shared the news, her eyes bright with excitement and nervousness, she made me a promise that brought tears to my eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, Aunt B, I want you to know that this baby will grow up knowing exactly who you are and what you've done for our family. They'll know about the wedding, about the scholarship, about all the ways you've loved and supported us. They'll never take your generosity for granted." David nodded emphatically, adding, "And we want to name the baby Margaret, if it's a girl, after Mom. We want to honor her memory and make sure this child understands the importance of family loyalty and gratitude." As I sit here in my garden, thinking about the grandchild who will carry my sister's name and hopefully her values, I feel a deep sense of completion. The hurt from the wedding has transformed into something beautiful, a stronger family, a meaningful scholarship, and the knowledge that future generations will understand the importance of acknowledging sacrifice. The roses are particularly beautiful this year, their blooms full and fragrant in the morning sun. Harold always said that the most beautiful flowers were the ones that grew quietly, without demanding attention, but that bloomed magnificently when their time came. I think he would be proud of how I've finally learned to bloom in my own quiet way. The Margaret Thompson Memorial Scholarship will continue long after I'm gone, ensuring that students like Maria and countless others will have the opportunity to honor the unsung heroes in their lives. And David and Sarah's child will grow up in a family that understands the difference between love taken for granted and love properly cherished. Sometimes the greatest victories are the quiet ones, the ones that unfold slowly and change hearts rather than headlines. My nephew's wedding taught me that I deserve to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be valued for the love I give so freely. And in learning that lesson, I've given my family and myself a gift more valuable than any wedding venue. The truth has a way of revealing itself, even when it takes time. Love has a way of growing stronger when it's properly tended. And sometimes, the most profound justice is the kind that heals rather than punishes, that builds rather than destroys. As I water my roses and plan for the scholarship's 3rd annual award ceremony, I know that Margaret would be proud of what her name has come to represent. Family loyalty, recognized sacrifice, and the understanding that the greatest gifts are often given by the quietest heroes. The end.